Defending democracy but walking a diplomatic tightrope. A military coup in Egypt draws concern but not condemnation from the US. Washington is now calling for consultation. But is that enough to end the confrontation or to resolve the US's own dilemma? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. A military coup in Egypt is placing the United States in an uncomfortable position. How to be seen to be supporting democracy and maintain its strategic interests in the region. The White House endorsed elections which brought a Muslim Brotherhood-led government to power. But by failing to condemn the coup, critics say, it's condoning the military overthrow of a democratically elected government. In a statement released by the White House on Saturday, US President Barack Obama denied the US was supporting any political group or movement, saying, "We remain committed to the Egyptian people and their aspirations for democracy, economic opportunity and dignity. But the future path of Egypt can only be determined by the Egyptian people." The White House has been careful to avoid the use of the word coup, an admission that could have serious repercussions for Egypt. The US is banned by law from giving aid to any country where a democratically elected government has been overthrown by a military coup. In this case, annual aid worth $1.5 billion, most of which goes to the military. Republican Senator John McCain is leading calls for that money to be withheld.
We have to suspend aid to the Egyptian military because the Egyptian military has overturned the vote of the people of Egypt. And we cannot set a precedent, which frankly let me put it this way, we cannot repeat the same mistakes that we made at other times in our history by supporting the removal of freely elected governments. And so I believe that the aid has to be suspended, that the Egyptian military has to set a timetable for elections and a new constitution, and then we should evaluate whether to continue the aid or not.
Well, that's plenty to talk about with our guests. In our Washington studios, PJ Crowley, former US Assistant Secretary of State and now professor at George Washington University. Here in Doha, Michael Stevens, a researcher at the Royal United Services Institute. And from Ankara in Turkey, Semih Idiz, a foreign policy expert and columnist for our Monitoronline newspaper. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with PJ Crowley in Washington. The army unseated elected leaders. It suspended the Constitution. These would appear to be facts. Why would the US administration refrain from characterizing this as a military seizure of power, a coup?
Well, quite simply, there's a legal process that has to be undertaken to make that determination. And the United States is assembling those facts right now and will make a judgment in a matter of days or weeks. In some cases, it's complex. For example, go back to 2009, there was a military coup in Honduras, but the military acted at the instructions of a parliament. So the United States at that time said, yes, it was a coup, but not a military coup because it was done at the behest of another entity of government. So this one is a little bit complex. The military did step in after an ultimatum. By the same token, there was a popular sentiment about removing the president. I think at the end of the day, the United States will judge this to be a military coup, but there's a process that has to be undertaken first.
Semih Idiz in Ankara, do you agree with this process that there needs to be some form of legal definition of what has happened within that society before a national position can be taken?
Well, of course, the American position has its own specificity, but looking from the perspective of Turkey, where we've seen 3 actual coups and one, what they call in this country, a postmodern coup, where the government was more or less pressurized out of governing, it does look very much like a coup, and whatever reluctance America may have about its definitions due to its own legal situation is not really much understood in Turkey, where they're looking on this as a coup and nothing else.
Michael Stevens, we hear the view there from Turkey, which has experienced its own very dramatic military processes and interrupting democratic process. What's your view? Does there need to be a defined legal position to give a common position among outsiders when this type of event occurs?
Unfortunately, it doesn't really matter what the legal definitions are or are universally agreed upon or not agreed upon, because I think if you look at it from a regional perspective, actually this is viewed through the lens of politics rather than process. So I think that it's very clear that some individuals and certain parties, particularly in the Gulf, have taken a position that it was not, and some have taken a position that it was. I think the United States coming up with a legal definition helps the United States in terms of its policy, but in terms of regional players and backers who have been working with Mohamed Morsi or against Mohamed Morsi, I think that it's really not that relevant.
Well, PJ Crowley, this process that you're talking about, does that take into account national considerations? In other words, national self-interest? Does that play a role in deciding whether or not to categorize this as a military coup?
This is a matter of law. And law triumphs under a democracy. So the United States has a commitment to Egypt to provide a certain level of assistance based on Egypt's commitments regarding Middle East peace. And there are contractual relationships that are undergird this. So it is important to make sure that there is a legal process so that whatever determination is made can be politically as well as legally defended. I will absolutely acknowledge that part of the determination here is a matter of policy, and part of determination is a matter of politics, and part of this is determining how do you best create leverage, in one sense by continuing aid, in one sense by cutting off aid, to help Egypt advance in terms of its democratic aspirations. Certainly Mohamed Morsi was a duly elected leader. A free and fair election. By the same token, you can make a strong argument he was not governing democratically and was systematically excluding key elements of Egyptian society. So there is a policy objective that the United States has, deepening democracy within Egypt, but obviously it will be evaluating how can it what tools can it use, what levers does it have to try to help Egypt, given what has happened here in the past few days?
Well, Michael Stevens, bearing in mind, too, that it wasn't only a government that was unseated, it was a constitution that had been endorsed in a popular referendum that has been suspended. It does seem that there is a totality here in terms of the military prescribing normal democratic process, does it not?
I think at the end of the day, again, it depends on whose side you're standing on. I think if you go and talk to a Muslim Brotherhood supporter, they would tell you that the processes which brought Mohamed Morsi to power needed to be respected. The military did not respect those. I think on the other side, certainly Egyptians I talk to that you might say were in the sort of liberal elites perhaps, they would say, well, Mohamed Morsi was not respecting the constitution. He was not acting democratically. Therefore, the military had a mandate to remove someone who did not respect the mandate that he was given democratically to govern the country.
So, Michael, Semih Idiz, it does appear here that there's very much a position taken on what you believe rather than actually what is.
Well, it is a very, I don't think that the situation in Egypt, although, you know, from our perspective, it is definitely a coup, but it doesn't really fit into any definite mold. I mean, there is, as the previous speaker was trying to underline, there is a background to this. We didn't come to here out of a void, and there were certain aspects of Morsi's rule which agitated large elements of society. Now, we can perhaps discuss this later on, but, you know, we have have a kind of parallel situation in Turkey. And so in Turkey we have the same division, and from one aspect, from one side of the divide, people are saying, well, of course it was a coup is not good, it is bad, we condemn it, but on the other hand there was a situation, and this is the product of that situation rather than a haphazard arbitrary thing. So I think that when we're looking at the matter, it's going to have wide ramifications for the region and for Turkey, but this definition and this argument or this splitting hairs as has been going on for some time is not going to help the situation. I think now the next stage will be to look on where this goes to, and that is what people are looking at from Turkey, not necessarily from the perspective of whether the Turkish military can do something like this. That, as far as I'm concerned, is out of the question, but whether the kind of social unrest that has been created in Egypt might find a parallel in Turkey and lead society in a dangerous direction.
Well, I'd like to pick up that issue about Turkey in a moment, but let's just take a wider look. Egypt was described during the Clinton administration as the most prominent player in the Arab world and a key US ally in the Middle East, and it's been crucial where Israel is concerned. Egypt was the first Arab state to officially recognize Israel. When the two signed a peace treaty in 1979, a deal Hosni Mubarak was keen to preserve when he came to power in 1981. And Egypt has good reason to cooperate. It's received more than $70 billion in military and economic aid since 1948. But the regional dynamics are changing. Qatar is currently Egypt's biggest financier, having donated $5 billion of late, with the promise of more to come. And other regional players like Turkey, Libya and Saudi Arabia have pledged significant economic support. Qatar has been consistent in backing change in Egypt. It was alone among the Gulf nations in supporting the overthrow of former President Hosni Mubarak in 2011, and it was quick to congratulate Egypt's interim president after this military coup. The Foreign Ministry adding that Qatar will continue to respect the will of Egypt. Saudi Arabia, which opposed the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, said, "We congratulate the leadership of Egypt at this critical period in history." Turkey considered ousted President Mohamed Morsi a strong ally and condemned his overthrow as unacceptable. And the African Union suspended Egypt from the 54-member bloc, demanding the restitution of constitutional order and condemning what it called the illegal seizure of power. But Semih Idiz, to get back to that point that you were making, does Turkey's position, for example, result more from its ties with the Muslim Brotherhood rather than a rejection of the democratic system itself being attacked? Is it about the players rather than about the system?
I think you are correct in that, but there is an asymmetrical situation here. I mean, we have Turkey, which for all intents and purposes is a democratic country. It has become so through the school of hard knocks with its own experience of the past 80 years, which is being led by Muslim Brotherhood sympathizing Islamist government. But the object on the other side of the fence, the object of sympathy, is operating in an undemocratic country. Now, this is a dilemma for Turkey. Obviously, Turkey has to condemn this coup because the government we have in Turkey itself was confronted with military meddling against it in the past. But on the other hand, it has to look after regional balances. Now, the subtlety in the Turkish position is, yes, it has condemned it. Yes, it has said this is unacceptable. But if you look at Foreign Minister Davutoğlu's statements shortly after that, within hours of the coup in Istanbul 2 days ago, he is referring about the speedy need to go to elections and also, of course, for Morsi to be part of the process. So, in fact, Turkey is not calling for a reinstatement of the previous government by any means, as the Islamic Brotherhood in Egypt is calling for. And in the background to this, Turkey has not suspended diplomatic relations, as is traditional in a coup. You recall your ambassador to show your displeasure. This is not going on. And the news in the Turkish media today is that Turkey is not going to suspend the military industry agreements it has with Syria, with Egypt. So for all intents and purposes, and despite this angry reaction, which perhaps sets Turkey aside compared to the West and many countries in the East, Turkey is not actually going all out against this situation either.
Well, Michael Stevens, this sort of subtlety of position appears to be reflected too by Qatar in terms of a mixed reaction almost, but importantly, as was pointed out there, the normal reaction to the military coup, the recall of ambassadors, the severing of all ties, this has not happened. Is there also this kind of subtlety, this delicacy in terms of a nuanced response being shown by what has been Egypt's biggest financial backer recently?
I think the Qataris have obviously looked at what happened in Egypt, knowing the size and the scale of their relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood, and realised that their diplomatic and foreign policy positions that they'd constructed over the last 2 years were in serious jeopardy. And if you combine that with the fact that they're on the back foot in Syria against Bashar al-Assad, it's actually not looking that good for Qatar right now. Obviously, they did respond very sort of positively and openly to the change. They did take longer than the Saudis or the Emiratis, who really did jump in quickly to send their congratulations. The Qataris took a bit longer, but their response was very sort of welcoming, supporting the will of the Egyptian people, and even sending their congratulations to the new president. So I don't think that they are trying to sow any discord here. I think right now what they're looking at is a foreign policy that they need to make sure that they can sort of gain as much as possible from a position which is obviously very difficult for them. They have been associated clearly with one side of Egyptian politics for as much as 2 years now, and they've made a financial and a political commitment to that. Now I think they need to hedge their bets a little bit. They have to work with all parties in Egypt and not try and influence the outcome of any political process, but simply offer support where it's needed. Perhaps redirecting money to soft power, subsidizing food prices, something like that would be a very, very beneficial move for Qatar rather than sort of directly dealing government to government.
Well, PJ Crowley, we heard the phrase there, hedging their bets in relation to Qatar. Is that what the US is doing as well to a degree?
Well, I think there's a recognition here that on principle, yes, Morsi was the democratic elected leader. From a pragmatic standpoint, he wasn't doing very well. And he had lost an enormous amount of support. And in fact, within his own inner circle, there were voices saying, look, this uncompromising position or approach that you take to governance is not necessarily going to serve, the Muslim Brotherhood's interests or Egypt's interests in the long run. I think everyone recognizes that Egypt is still nearer to the beginning of building democratic institutions and tradition than it is getting close to a level of maturity. And as part of this process, they're going to be, it's not going to be a straight line. They're going to be, steps and missteps. And so now the real question is, I think pragmatically, the United States, as we've been talking about with most who are linked to Egypt, accept what has just happened and are now taking a forward-looking position. Okay, given the reality that we have right now, where do we go from here, and how can we be best supported?
Well, there's been some strong reaction on our Facebook page. Siad Imam says, the military wrongly interfered to remove an elected president who must complete his term. This is a clear coup and an injustice to the party who won the people's confidence. Mohammed Zayed disagrees, saying what happened and is still happening in Egypt is not a coup. It's a revolution made by people of Egypt and supported by the military, who supported the free, legal will of the people. David Epstein tells us the USA is not taking anyone's side in Egypt, and that's how it should be. The Egyptian people should decide for themselves who should lead them without external influences. And Stephen Koch adds, I see no problem with it when it's what the majority of the people want. Democratically elected, democratically rejected. But this raises the issue of at what point does a mob become a people fighting for democratic change? Are there any clear guidelines to give a consistency to deciding that? I'll put that to you, Michael Stevens.
I think there are precedents before. There was an op-ed in the New York Times written by Shadi Hamid, who lives with me here in Doha, who said, I'm drawing parallels perhaps to Algeria. So there are analysts trying to look at other sort of times when this has happened, particularly emphasizing the role of Islamists being removed from politics. I think that's an important dynamic to add in here. It's not just sort of mob rule taking power. Obviously, there's been a lot of commentary on many different phases of the Muslim Brotherhood's position over the years, how it's been isolated from politics. I think it's well documented. But obviously, at the moment, the problem is that we're getting stuck on semantics about what is mob rule, what is a coup, are the military everybody's best friend, are they everybody's worst enemy, is it right for them to close TV stations, is it right for them to sort of arrest people that the majority doesn't agree with. I think we're going to be talking about this for a long time, and I'm afraid there's no yardstick really to accurately measure the Egyptian situation by.
Well, PJ Crowley, once again highlighting the nature of the government that has been removed in Egypt, a Muslim Brotherhood government. Now, in recent years, you have seen a rise in political Islam and involvement in political democratic systems of Islamist parties. We saw it, for example, in Gaza, where Hamas won a democratic election, which was rejected by the United States and indeed by Israel. Is there the danger that the involvement of new people, newcomers perhaps, to a democratic political process, getting denied by some kind of military action or not recognized by outside forces such as the United States, is this a potential problem in terms of what is happening in Egypt today?
No, it's one element. For example, democracy is not just about elections. Democracy is also about how you govern. The United States did acknowledge that the election that brought Hamas into a share of the government was free and fair. It chose as a matter of policy not to engage that government. But I want to go back to what Michael said a moment ago. I think part of what the test will be here, and we will not know this for perhaps years, is even if there was a non-democratic step, the question is, does democracy deepen as a result of this step? I was living in Turkey in 1979 and 1980, when the Turkish military, as the guardian of the secular tradition that established by Ataturk, stepped in Turkey and, in essence, threw out the entire system that was dominated at that time by Süleyman Demirel and Bülent Ecevit. But over time, over a matter of years, both Ecevit and Demirel came back to play very vital roles in the future of a much stronger, Turkish democracy, and that set the stage for what we have seen, today and the remarkable democratic and economic turnaround in Turkey. One of the tests here for Egypt will be, for example, after the dust settles, will the Muslim Brotherhood be allowed to re-engage in Egyptian politics? They should. And will the military and the opposition welcome them back into the system as they should? So it is possible that either Mohamed Morsi or someone else in the leadership of the Brotherhood, they can and should be able to play a vital role. And hopefully they will learn the lessons of having been democratically elected, but then governing poorly. What do they learn from that? How they apply that for the benefit of Egypt going forward?
Well, Semih Idiz, that is a fascinating parallel being expressed there. Could it be seen, what is happening in Egypt, as part of a wider democratic process, though the actual individual events within the train are not? Is this perhaps a deepening of democracy rather than a denial of it?
Well, whatever you want to say about it, what is certain is that it is the growing pains of democracy. Turkey did not come to where it is easily. We had 3 coups. This is what I meant by the school of hard knocks that we've been through. But as Mr. Crowley just pointed out, and he mentioned Süleyman Demirel and Bülent Ecevit, these 2 politicians have emerged over the years as key players in Turkey, but they were also at incredible loggerheads when he described his term term in Turkey when the military took over. And that represents the diversity of the environment, political diversity. I think this will start a debate in Egypt, and it will start an even broader debate in Turkey about advanced democracy, how we can take what we already have to a higher level. As you know, Turkey already is vying for EU membership, so it is aiming for the highest standard of democracy. So in fact, we can look at this whole process in Egypt and what is happening in Turkey of late in terms of this growing pains of actually moving on in the democratic direction. I do not see
it is a debate. I'm going to have to interrupt you. I'm sorry, Semih Idiz, but it is a debate that will grow. But thank you to my guests, PJ Crowley, Michael Stevens, and Semih Idiz. A reminder, you can find this program and many more at aljazeera.com. Follow the links for shows and Inside Story. And also at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can leave us your comments there too. Thanks for watching. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.